South Korea, K-pop, cutting-edge tech, and martial law. It's a lot to take in.
Yeah, it's definitely a dramatic turn of events. It's not something you expect from a country that's often held up as, a model for democracy in the region.
So we've got all these breaking news reports coming in from sources like the AP, CNN, LRM, even some local Korean outlets. And they're all painting a pretty tense picture.
Right, and that's why we're here, to sort of break it all down. Figure out what led to this sudden declaration of martial law and what it means, for South Korea, for the region.
Okay, so first things first. We have to talk about this kind of jarring contrast, right? On one hand, you've got South Korea, this economic powerhouse, this cultural trendsetter. On the other hand, you have this sudden invocation of martial law, which kind of brings up memories of, a more authoritarian past.
Exactly. That historical context is really important. I mean, martial law, it's not just some sort of symbolic gesture. It's a huge deal. It basically gives the military control, overrides civilian authority. So the question is, what pushed President Yoon to take such a drastic step?
Well, his speech didn't exactly mince words. He talked about eradicating pro-North Korean forces and protecting the constitutional democratic order. It almost sounds like he's declaring war on his own people.
Yeah, that strong language is definitely significant, especially when you consider the already tense political climate in South Korea. President Yoon has been locked in this power struggle with the opposition Democratic Party, which actually holds a majority in parliament. And it's not just a matter of disagreeing on policy. They've been actively blocking his agenda, impeaching his allies, and even launching investigations into potential scandals.
So this declaration of martial law, it didn't just come out of nowhere. There's this whole political drama unfolding behind the scenes.
Right, exactly. You have to understand, this isn't just a reaction to some immediate threat. This is like the culmination of simmering tensions and political maneuvering.
Which makes the opposition's reaction even more explosive, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're not just disagreeing. They're calling it illegal, a power grab, a blatant attack on democracy. There was one representative who even compared it to tanks rolling through the streets.
Yeah, it's a powerful image for sure. It evokes this dark period in South Korea's history. It really highlights just how angry and concerned they are. But there's also this layer of irony here, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. Yoon is accusing them of being pro-North Korea, but they're the ones who are desperately trying to get into parliament, which is now blocked, of course, to try to overturn his declaration.
Yeah, it definitely complicates the narrative a bit. I mean, if they were really sympathetic to North Korea, wouldn't they welcome a move towards authoritarianism? It kind of suggests that this situation might be more about internal power struggles than some external threat.
So we've got this political tug-of-war playing out.
Yeah.
But what does martial law actually look like on the ground? What does it mean for everyday people?
Yeah, it's not just words.
Right.
It has immediate and very real consequences. Imagine you wake up one morning and your elected representatives are locked out of parliament. You can't gather and protest. Soldiers and police are stationed everywhere. That's the reality for a lot of South Koreans right now.
That sounds incredibly unsettling. And, the sources we've seen, they mentioned striking doctors being ordered back to work within 48 hours, which seems like a pretty direct way of showing who's in control.
Oh, absolutely. It shows how martial law can be used to suppress dissent and force compliance, even in essential sectors like healthcare. And this raises some serious questions about individual rights and freedoms under this new order.
It's not just the orders, though, right? It's the imagery. The reports describe soldiers and police blockading parliament, helicopters landing on the grounds. It's like something out of a political thriller.
Yeah, that visual element is so powerful. It sends a very clear message. The military's in charge, and they're not afraid to use their power. So the question becomes, is this a temporary measure, or is this the new normal in South Korea?
And how are people responding?
Well, it's a mixed bag. Some people are willing to give President Yoon the benefit of the doubt. They trust that he's acting in the best interests of the nation. Others are deeply concerned. They see this as a dangerous step towards authoritarianism. And then there's a whole spectrum of opinions in between.
So you've got this internal turmoil.
Yeah.
This power struggle playing out. But we can't forget about the elephant in the room, right? North Korea.
Right. This isn't happening in a vacuum. The Korean Peninsula is already a geopolitical pressure cooker. And this move just turned up the heat.
Yeah, it really does feel like someone just tossed a match onto a pile of dry tinder. I mean, we're talking about a region that's already dealing with so much, military tensions, nuclear threats, a history of conflict, and now this. It's got to have the international community on edge. What are they saying about it all?
It's still early days, but reactions are definitely starting to come in. World leaders are watching this very closely. You have to remember, South Korea isn't just another country. It's a major player in the global economy and a key strategic ally to a lot of powerful nations. So this move has the potential to really destabilize an already tense region, and nobody wants to see that happen.
Especially with North Korea kind of lurking in the shadows, always ready to capitalize on any sign of weakness. Have they made any moves or statements yet?
That's the thing. Their silence is almost deafening. North Korea's propaganda machine is usually so quick to jump on advice like this, try to twist things to fit their narrative. But this time they're being unusually quiet. It's like they're, I don't know, assessing the situation, calculating their next move, which is a little unsettling in itself.
Yeah, it's like they're the unpredictable wild card in this already high-stakes poker game. So, okay, we've got this internal power struggle, a nervous international community, and a silent but potentially dangerous North Korea. What's the outlook here? What are some of the possible scenarios that could play out?
Well, it's tough to say for sure. Predicting the future is never easy. But we can sort of explore some potential paths. The best case scenario, I think, is that cooler heads prevail. President Yoon manages to reassure both his people and the world that this is just a temporary measure, something that was absolutely necessary to address a specific threat. And then he takes swift action to restore those democratic processes and rebuild trust. The opposition, while they might still be critical, they agree to come to the table, engage in dialogue, find some common ground.
That sounds like the ideal outcome. But is it realistic? I mean, given what we know about Yoon's personality and those deep political divisions.
You're right to be skeptical. I think a more likely scenario, and this is, probably the one that keeps a lot of people up at night, is that things drag on. Neither side is willing to back down. The opposition continues to challenge Yoon's authority, maybe through legal channels or even civil disobedience. Meanwhile, the economic and social costs of martial law start to add up, leading to growing unrest and instability.
And that instability is exactly what North Korea might be waiting for. Yeah. An opportunity to, stir the pot, exploit the division and weakness.
Exactly. They could launch a cyber attack, conduct military exercises near the border, or even just escalate their rhetoric, all designed to further destabilize the situation. And that's why it's so crucial for South Korea to find a way to resolve this internal crisis quickly and present a united front to the world.
Okay, so best case scenario, everyone calms down and works things out. Worst case scenario, things spiral out of control and the region is plunged into further chaos. Are there any other possibilities? Something in between those extremes.
There's always the possibility of a middle ground, but it's probably going to be a messy one. Maybe after a period of heightened tension, both sides recognize that they need to compromise. Yoon might agree to some concessions, perhaps, by lifting some of the more restrictive aspects of martial law, and the opposition, they agree to work with him on key issues. It wouldn't be a perfect solution, but it could be a path towards, some semblance of stability.
So a lot hinges on Yoon's willingness to bend a little, and the opposition's ability to apply enough pressure without pushing him further into a corner. What about the international community? Can they play a role in all this?
I think they can play a crucial role, both in terms of, applying pressure and potentially facilitating some kind of dialogue. Yeah. The United States, for example, they have a big interest in seeing a stable and democratic South Korea. So they might use their diplomatic channels to urge restraint, encourage dialogue, and maybe even offer to mediate between the government and the opposition.
And what about China? They have a complicated relationship with both Koreas, right?
Oh, absolutely. China's response is going to be really interesting to watch. On the one hand, they might see this as an opportunity to, increase their influence in the region. Maybe by offering economic support to South Korea or even trying to mediate between the North and the South. But on the other hand, they might be wary of, having this instability right on their doorstep, especially if it leads to a stronger U.S. presence in the region.
So we've got a lot of moving parts here, a lot of competing interests, and a whole lot of uncertainty. But one thing's for sure, the decisions that are made the next few days and weeks, they're going to have a significant impact, not just on South Korea, but potentially on the entire world.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. We're at a critical juncture.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about the political backdrop, the potential consequences of martial law, the international implications. But I think there's one crucial piece of the puzzle we haven't really explored yet.
I agree. We need to delve deeper into President Yoon himself.
Exactly. Who is this man? What makes him tick? And what does his past tell us about how he might handle this crisis? Okay, so we've talked about, the political climate in South Korea, the potential fallout from this martial law declaration, and the global implications. But I think to really understand what might happen next, we can take a closer look at the man at the center of it all, President Yoon Suk-yeol. I mean, he's not your typical politician, is he?
No, not at all. I mean, his background is as a prosecutor.
Right.
Someone who spent his career upholding the law, fighting corruption. He even earned the nickname Bulldog for his tenacity and his, relentless pursuit of justice.
So he comes into politics with this kind of outsider image, this reputation for being tough, uncompromising. Did that play a role in his election, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, his campaign really capitalized on that man of action persona.
Right.
He promised to clean up the government, challenge the establishment, fight for the everyday citizen. And it really resonated with voters who were just disillusioned with traditional politics. They saw him as this force for change, someone who wouldn't back down from a fight.
It's a familiar story, right? The outsider who shakes things up.
Yeah.
But how did that translate to his actual presidency? Did he live up to those promises?
Well, he had some early successes for sure, tackling some high-profile corruption cases, pushing through some reforms. But that bulldog mentality, it also led to some clashes, even within his own party. He's been criticized for being inflexible, surrounding himself with loyalists, struggling to build consensus. Some people say that his unwavering belief in his own righteousness, it makes it hard for him to compromise, to really see other perspectives.
And now we're seeing that same kind of unyielding approach playing out on a much larger scale. He's framed this martial law declaration as this battle for the soul of South Korea, a fight against this dangerous internal enemy. Does that make compromise unlikely in this situation?
It's definitely a possibility. I mean, if Yoon truly believes that he's facing this existential threat to the nation, he might be unwilling to back down. He might see any concession as a sign of weakness. And that could lead to a dangerous escalation, further polarizing the country, deepening that political divide.
So we're not just dealing with the political crisis, we're dealing with this clash of personalities, of ideologies. How does Yoon's view of North Korea factor into all of this? Is this move fueled by genuine security concerns, or is it more about, consolidating power?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, Yoon has taken a very hardline stance against North Korea. He clearly sees them as a serious threat. But some of his critics argue that he's using that threat, maybe even exaggerating it a bit, to justify his actions and silence his opponents.
It all comes down to trust then, doesn't it? Can we take Yoon at his word? Or is this all a calculated power play? What can we learn from his past that might shed some light on his true motivations?
Well, it's not always easy to separate, genuine conviction from political maneuvering. But if you look back at Yoon's career, one thing that really stands out is that he's not afraid to go against the grain, to make enemies in the pursuit of what he believes is right. And that unwavering belief in his own judgment, it can be both a strength and a weakness. It can lead to bold action, but it can also lead to a refusal to compromise, even when compromise might be in the best interest of the nation.
So we have this really complex figure at the heart of this really volatile situation, a man with this strong sense of justice, a history of taking on powerful forces, but also a tendency towards inflexibility, and maybe a potential blind spot when it comes to his own judgment. So what should we be watching for in the coming days and weeks to kind of get a sense of where this is all heading?
I'd say pay close attention to Yoon's rhetoric. Is he doubling down on that threat narrative? Painting the opposition as enemies of the state? Or is he starting to dial back the tension a little, suggesting maybe that he's willing to negotiate? And of course, actions speak louder than words, so watch for any signs of compromise. Lifting some of those restrictions, releasing detained opposition figures, engaging in some kind of dialogue, those would be positive signals.
And what about the opposition? What's their next move?
Well, they're facing a tough choice. Do they continue to confront Yoon directly, risk further crackdowns, or do they try to take a more strategic approach, maybe focus on legal challenges, building public support, seeking international pressure on the Yoon administration? Their response is going to be really important. It could really shape the trajectory of this crisis.
It feels like we're standing at a crossroads. One path leads towards dialogue, de-escalation, a gradual return to some sense of normalcy. The other path, well, it leads towards deeper division, heightened repression, and potentially even more instability. Which path South Korea takes, it really hinges on the choices that its leaders make, the resilience of its democratic institutions, and the response from the international community.
It's a good reminder that democracy is fragile. It's constantly being tested, and ultimately, it rests on the actions and the choices of those in power and the vigilance of its citizens. What happens in South Korea in the coming days and weeks, it's going to have implications far beyond its borders. It's a story that deserves our attention, our scrutiny, and our thoughtful consideration.
Well said. As always, we encourage our listeners to stay informed, stay engaged, and keep asking those tough questions. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into this unfolding situation in South Korea.